the first page and the first philosopher in our McGill reading. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in the past, I always liked asking the group whether they liked the philosopher and whether they thought it was true philosophy. So let me ask you, did you like this reading? What was your reaction to it?
I like this reading a lot, and I think the Anaximander should consider as a great philosopher. Okay, so that's pretty straight because his thinking is unusual, non-common sense. So, and in a way, you know, especially his idea about the model of the universe is kind of modern, okay, kind of Newtonian idea. So I think that's interesting to study the pre-Socratic ancient philosopher, which we will know how do they come out this idea and what's their invention, okay, in this new idea. Even his model is technically is not that popular through the history. Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah.
Oh, those are great comments. The other question I wanted to ask is, do you think that this is real philosophy?
You know me, I don't have the strict definition of who is a philosopher, who is not a philosopher. But in my opinion, it's good reading and good worth my effort to understand this philosopher and this philosophy. But I believe a lot of people may not think Alexander as a philosopher. He probably more on the scientist, you know, but I have a different view. So,
well, the reason that I would categorize him as a philosopher has to do with the way that I view philosophy. And it seems to me that, as Aristotle said, philosophy begins with wonder. And when he made that statement, the way we're supposed to interpret wonder is as curiosity, not reverence. So when he talks about wonder, he talks about curiosity. So the way I view philosophy, we approach the world with curiosity. And we have curiosity about several different topics. One of those topics is the question of why are things the way they are? Why are things the way they are? That is an important topic, an important question. And I would say that attempts to answer that question fall into the realm of what traditionally has been called natural philosophy. Natural philosophy, which nowadays is named physics, because physic was the Greek word for nature, is simply trying to understand why the things are the way they are in the physical world. So I agree with you that there has been a tendency among some to reject this type of inquiry and speculation on the basis that it is more science than philosophy. But I would say myself that natural philosophy includes the science of physics and a lot more. So that's why I consider this to be philosophy.
yeah, I agree. But one more important thing I'd like to mention is he's not just limit himself as a nature philosopher. He builds based on the same idea as a balance, and then he also extend to the idea of what is justice, right? So I think that's also important, you know, in to consider him as a philosopher.
I think that I like your comment, and it reminds me that there is a tendency in modern culture to reject inquiry that assumes there's an overlap between the physical world and the moral realm, the realm of society. And here, Anaximander is asserting that there is an overlap. You know, you go into a class in physics in college, they're not going to teach you about words like justice and how they overlap with the natural world. They're not going to talk about that because they try to keep it completely neutral and impersonal.
Mhm.
But some of the greatest philosophers are well aware of this overlap, and it happens to be a topic that I'm particularly interested in. What is the overlap between physics and human society?
I think that'd be great to keep in mind, to the end, we can review, what the Anaximanders, is doing, So probably we can start from the reading.
Right, I totally agree. I want to, as we go through the reading, I want to, whenever there is an indication of this overlap or separation, I want to talk about that as an important issue. Because to me, it seems like that's one of the most important questions that philosophers have asked. And I see it everywhere. I see it in all the philosophers. So, okay, well, so
Let's
much
start,
more.
and I'm going to share the screen, and then
Great. Okay, I'm going to read one paragraph at a time, and we'll start with the first paragraph, and then we can make comments about it. Sound good?
yeah, go ahead.
Here we go. So, Thales of Miletus is traditionally credited with having been the first philosopher, since he was the first to put forward a non-mythological account of the origin and nature of things. But we know no more of his views than that he claimed that all things originated from water, and it is unlikely that he worked out this thesis in detail. It remained for his pupil and successor, Anaximander, to produce the first comprehensive natural philosophy, a system of astonishing acumen and sophistication.
Yeah, okay. So I think Thales should be, okay, in our country, Western tradition, considered the very first philosopher. But since he has no record left, so that's why I believe that's the reason McGill stopped with Anaximander instead of Thales, because probably not much thing to talk about him. We probably can spend some time talk about Thales, as the.
Well, I agree with everything you just said. And I agree that that's probably the reason they omitted him. And I also think he's a very significant figure in the history of philosophy. And it is worth talking about Thales. And that brings up another topic, which is related to this reading, which is the topic of the Milesian philosopher. And one aspect of philosophy that is important, I believe, in looking at the early Greek Socratics and also the post-Socratics, is to realize that they fall into a number of different schools. Often the schools have some sort of reason for their similarity due to their geography. The philosophers in Miletus all form a type of school which was interested in investigating what we would today call scientific matters and cosmological matters. And the school possesses three main philosophers that come up a lot, and that's Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. And comparing and contrasting their different views is a good way to understand all of them, because each one makes a different contribution. What do you say?
Yeah, I think the McGill only cover Anaximanders, And then for Thales, and I think he talking about everything. Hold on. Start with water and the basics. That's his concept. I just cannot think about the word. The beginning. Sorry, go ahead. I think that's the thing we want to talk about. Thales and then Anaximander is the disciple and continue from the theory of Thales.
Exactly. I think the word you're thinking of is something like apeiron.
Appearance, appearance. So I think more important is his concept of appearance, other than water. And I don't know you noticed that or not. In the Bible, the Gospel of John, when they talk about at the beginning of the word, there's at the beginning they have the word. Okay, the beginning actually in Greek is apeiron. Okay, so actually, Thales' idea about water is not kind of like an atom, okay, the fundamental element, kind of like the beginning, apeiron, okay, this kind of concept, which is the same as in Bible, talk about the beginning, there has a word, okay, so I think that's the same, that's the same word they are using in Greek.
Well, that's very interesting.
I just find out about like 3 months ago, okay, because one guy, he tried to study New Testament in Greek, and we realize, okay, that's the same, that's the word, okay, in the Gospel of John, they use for beginning.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that I totally agree with that, but what I do like is bringing up and comparing and contrasting these views by Thales and Anaximander with the Bible. But what I compare it more to than John, who talks about in the beginning, is the original substance in the Old Testament. Because the notion of the Old Testament is that in the beginning there was chaos, and then God came and brought order. And to me, the chaos feels more like aperia than what John was talking about. But in any case, both the Bible and these three Milesians were discussing cosmic issues, the origin of the cosmos. So it's interesting to compare and contrast them. And I guess the biggest difference is the fact that the three Milesians discuss the universe in completely non-animistic, non-divine terms. Everything is just described as a physical process. Whereas,
Yeah, I think that's considered as advanced, in the in this point of view, that.
that's you say, what did you say?
I think that's advanced, because during that time,
Advance, exactly.
yeah, all the culture that have the tendency to use mystical mythology to explain the beginning of this world. And then doesn't matter, consider as stuff from chaos or start from the apeiron, what's the meaning of that meaning, or the atom or whatever, it is considered as advanced. That's the first step to enter the field of science.
Exactly. Okay, well, let me go to the next paragraph. So Anaximander conceived his problem to be that of explaining how the present constitution of the universe developed out of a primordial condition of simplicity. Apparently, he did not consider the possibility that things had always been much the same. To this extent, he inherited the notion of evolution from Near Eastern mythologies. Which all told of how the world had been fashioned out of the pre-existing chaos or homogeneous matter, usually water. But in rejecting divine personal agency and in substituting a more or less continuous process for separate acts of creation, Anaximander radically transformed the idea. So I think that the sentence here that talks about rejecting agency and substituting a continuous process refers to the fact that, as we're familiar from the Old Testament, we see that we begin with chaos, and then we have creation after creation. Each day is a new creation. There's no continuous process. They're just events. However, in this, there's this whirling motion, and then the reaction of the different parts, and it's all one continuous process.
Yeah.
But exact definition of apeiron is very important. It has a lot of different translations. Now, in this McGill summary, it's talked about undifferentiated, but literally it means infinite,
yeah,
or boundaryless, or boundless, which you can interpret as undifferentiated, but that is certainly not the only translation.
I think the definition of just 1 minute. I think that's a two different word in my opinion. I think that's a two different word. Okay, for Sadie's, he's talking about a period, okay, which is the beginning, the element, and for Anaximander is talking about apeiron, right? apeiron, okay, which is different than what. 等一下，很重要吗？重要。哦 ，just 1 minute.
Okay.
Francisco 的人，在一会儿就要来做下面的人。OK。所以他来，因为我在那个你稍微 take care。
Jim, do you notice there's two different concept, a period and another word, a period from Sadie's. I don't know. You get what I'm talking about?
My understanding is that Thales believed that the original substance of the entire universe was water, which was one of the elements. Later, Anaximenes argued that the original substance was air. Now, what was Anaximander doing in contrast? He was rejecting the notion that there was any single original element. And
That's
he
true. Yeah, I
was
agree. Yeah.
postulating that there was something different than one of the elements, which was apeiron, which is boundless, infinite, has different, it has different translations and different interpretations. But whatever it is, just like you said, it's not one of the elements. Which means that some people, consider this to be an advance because it was an attempt. It was really the invention of metaphysics because it made a leap from what people saw in the physical world and postulated something unknown that caused them all. But the best part, the most interesting part of this line of thinking was his argument why he could not accept water. Because the reason that we find his argument interesting is because a large part of philosophy is giving rational reasons for things. So Thales had this notion of water.
Let me bring back one thing. I think that's quite important, and then I think I need to discuss with you is arcade. I'm sorry, I didn't get the right word at the beginning. Arcade.
Oh, arcade.
Okay, so my understanding is
Right.
Thales is talking about arcade. Okay, and the arcade is water. Okay, the concept of arcade is the kind of the beginning, and that's the word that has been used in the Bible as arche, A-R-C-H-E.
Oh, now I see what you were saying.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I think at the beginning I got a little bit confused on these two words. And then Anaximander kind of abandoned the concept of arche, which we should translate as a beginning. Okay, so he takes us the material start. Okay, how does the component or what's the fundamental material, which he is talking about apeiron, okay? That one to explain. I think he tried to explain is what's before arche. And I talk about Anaximander. Anaximander tried to explain is what's before arche, because arche is the beginning, and what's before that. So before that is chaos, okay, which is apeiron, infinite, boundless, okay, chaos, okay, that's that. And so I think that's the difference of arche and apeiron, because apeiron we can consider as chaos, and then arche I will understand as the beginning. I don't know. I make it clear.
That's a reasonable explanation.
Okay, I'm glad that you say reasonable.
I'm not saying I necessarily totally agree with it, but I think
yeah. I don't expect you totally agree, but I'm talking.
But it's important to separate the two different words.
Yeah, I think they are two. Those are two different concepts. We should not see as Anaximander replace Thales water with apeiron. Okay, I think he is talking about different concept, and I have a tendency to explain is Thales is thinking about arche, which is the beginning. What's the beginning? Okay, and what's the fundamental, which is water. And his disciple or his follower, Anaximander, start to think about what's before that. Okay, it's a chaos. And before the arche, okay, which is the beginning, before the beginning, they should have something is apparent, is boundless, infinity, chaos. Okay, and I think probably in the next paragraph, it talk about there's no distinguish. So there's nothing so-called hot or cold, dry or wet, and damp or tepid. Okay, so it's totally chaos, undistinguishable. I think that's the case.
Okay, let's go on to the next paragraph.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Anaximander postulated an undifferentiated stuff out of which the world arose. He called it the boundless. This was not any one of the traditional elements, earth, air, or rather at that date mist, fire, and water, but something intermediate. Since it was no more wet than dry and no more hot than cold, it was presumably damp and tepid. In opposition to Thales, who had held the basic stuff to be water, Anaximander conceived it as thus neutral on the ground that the elements are in opposition to one another. Air is cold, water moist, fire hot, and therefore, if any one of them were infinite, the rest would have ceased to be by this time. This is the first recorded philosophical argument, a criticism of a predecessor's view, supported by an appeal to reason rather than to revelation or to a special mode of insight.
I think the important key is appeal to reason, not through revelation, right? I think that's
Sure, but can you restate the argument?
appeal to reason rather than to revelation or to spatial mode of insight.
Well, sure, I get that, but can you restate Anaximander's argument here?
I think that he's going to talk about the model, the Earth model, the universe model, and then that's he used reason to argue, instead of.
Well, in this paragraph, it indicates that he's using reason already to refute Thales.
Okay, how do you think about he used?
Okay, so I have a somewhat different interpretation.
Okay, go ahead.
Than the one you gave about some philosophers presenting an arche, which is first, and Anaximander bypassing that process and going to something before the first. And I'm going to go back to a more traditional look. This is Aristotle's view and many others, that they're all talking about what there was first. So that's okay. We can have different opinions on that. But Anaximenes believes that what there was at first was air. Thales, water. Anaximander, the boundless. Now the question, let's assume that. Now then, why the question comes up, and I believe it's answered in this paragraph, why did Anaximander reject Thales's water? And he gave an argument for that. He said why water would not work. Now that's the reason they're talking about. This is philosophy. This is the logical, reasonable part that is considered to be so important in philosophy, giving reasons. So what is the reason? The reason is that if water is the origin of everything that exists, he's not able to imagine how the opposites of water could arise from water.
Mm-hmm.
Hot and cold don't arise out of each other. Fire can't come out of water. So the original view by Thales is first there's water, then everything else arose out of that. Anaximander's argument is, no, you can't have the opposite of water arise out of water. Now, when Anaximenes comes, he doesn't want to use the notion of the boundless and the infinite. he's going to make the argument that everything can arise from air. Because, and he has certain arguments, ones that, Thales didn't even consider. So all three of these people are looking at foundation. What is the foundational substance of the universe? And my own interpretation here is that Anaximander, because he believed that the different elements couldn't arise out of each other, he had to argue that there was some kind of substance which was undifferentiated, and that is how everything came to be. So is that a very different?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense for me. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then I think that's one thing we can discuss later or further is when we talk about Anaximander, right? Is the later philosopher. Is that advanced or not, right? Because he kind of abandoned what Anaximander is talking about and go back to the concept of arcade and using air instead of water. I think that's worth to discuss. Is this kind of new model, Anaximenes model, is as advanced from Anaximander or not? I think that McGill also talk about this. It's more common sensual, because it's easy to accept if you think about everything stuff from air. And then I talk about Anaximenes model, and everything flow from the air, and that could be, another way to easier to accept, okay, by most of the people.
Okay, well, let me continue to the next paragraph.
Please. Yeah.
The boundless was supposed to be infinite in extent, and ageless and deathless, that is, infinite in time. Anaximander, it seems, called it divine, but only because of its agelessness and deathlessness. He did not attribute to it any characteristics of personality, or, as far as we know, intelligent consciousness.
Yeah, so his divine is not Christian divine, it's just nature divine. Okay, that's the words I use. Should we go on?
Sometimes it's
Oh, you have something to say about this paragraph?
no, let's go on.
Let's go on.
No,
Okay.
I just want to bring out one thing from the last paragraph.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
let's go back. So it says the boundless is infinite in extent. And Anaximander had a view of the universe that was much larger than that of other thinkers. He believed that there were multiple worlds, and he believed in this notion of infinite extent, and that's another way to define this word boundless. So far we've been talking about boundless as kind of an intermediate substance, which doesn't take on the characteristics of any of the four elements, and therefore it can become all of them. But another way of looking at the boundless, I'll just say, because scholars differ on this, is they interpret it as infinite. And one secondary source that I liked argued that the notion of infinity came from the idea that there was so much substance and variety in the universe that the origin of the universe must be infinite in extent and variety. So the way that you would interpret infinite in that sense would be inexhaustible, that it keeps pouring out. The motion continues. The substance keeps continuing. And I was thinking, as I was reading that interpretation, about the modern cosmological view of the universe, that the universe, the origin of the universe was a simple point in space, which is smaller than an atom. And that all of the matter and energy and dimension of the universe all came out of this atom. It almost feels that in our modern interpretation of cosmology is something like there's an infinite outpouring, which explains just the large extent of the universe as we understand it.
So let me ask you a question. Okay, here talk about infinity. Okay, infinite in time. Okay, my question would be, do you think Anaximander has the concept of infinite size of space? This concept of infinity. Your answer is yes.
I think that that's a good question. The question is, it says that it's infinite in time and space. So the question we ask ourselves is, did he believe that the universe as a whole really was infinite, that it
that's the question.
extended everywhere, or that there was some kind of boundary somewhere?
So sounds like
what I interpret it as is there's an infinite, inexhaustible outpouring, but not that the universe is infinite and extends so much as the motion and matter that came to form the universe is infinitely in a continuous process.
Okay, so in another way, if I ask the question in a different way, right? We know Aristotle rejected the existence of infinity. Okay, does he the same as Aristotle or different? Does he
seems to be different?
You think it's different? Okay, so that's the only thing I need to know.
Yeah.
And then apparently, I think when you think about the universe, sounds like at the beginning you need to decide whether or not you want to accept the concept of infinity. Okay, so for example, Parmenides, okay, he will not accept the concept of infinity. So he has to come to his idea of the big sphere, which is not infinity and, but endless, this kind of concept. I think that's quite important.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So probably we can move on.
Oh. Well, I have another question related to infinity.
Okay, go ahead.
So, according to this interpretation of this paragraph by McGill, he argues that the universe is infinite in time, but that seems to contradict the notion that the universe appeared at one time and went through a certain process. So I'm wondering how that can be reconciled. How can it be infinite in time when it sounds like...
Okay, I know your point. If you have a beginning point, right, you should have the end point, right? It's hard. Well,
even if you don't have an end point, even the fact that you have a beginning point, I would think doesn't, would negate the notion of infinite time.
Yes. Okay. I think that's an interesting question, and I don't think we have the answer now.
Okay.
No. And yeah, it's a great question. For example, unless you go to this world is static, Okay, this universe is static. It always been this way. Okay, so that's endless, right? There's no beginning, no end. It always this way.
And that's Aristotle's view. That the universe has all, that is one of the big differences between Aristotle and many of these Milesian philosophers, that
And
they
the
believe that Aristotle talks a lot about eternal and unchanging. Okay, so
yeah, I think that's interesting. That and then we will have the chance to deal with Aristotle.
yeah, we'll deal with that when we get to
Yeah,
Aristotle.
then we get there. Okay, that's great. Let's move on.
Okay, the boundless was also said to encompass all the worlds, implying an infinite or at least indefinitely large number of individual worlds like this one. The initial step in the generation of a world occurs when, as a result of its internal motion, we are not told how, something capable of begetting hot and cold out of the eternal is separated off. The hot and the cold, conceived as things, not as qualities of a substance, separate, and at the same time, a motion and rotation is imparted to them. The hot, which is fire, encircles like the bark around a tree, the cold, which contains earth, mist, and water. In due course, these latter three also separate, the earth remaining at the center of the whirl, with the water in a ring around it, which is in turn enclosed in a circle of mist. The fire around the mist and water heats them until pressure builds up, which, combined with the centrifugal force of the whirl, results in a cosmic explosion. The mist is caused to shut up the fire in gigantic hoops, like inner tubes, which circle around the earth.
Yeah, I think that's so look, so he already had the concept of 4 elements. Let's put it this way, right?
Of what?
4 elements: the earth, water, fire, and the air.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay. Look, guys, this concept has been around this world for a long time. Yeah. So that's first thing.
Yeah, that was the 4 elements was part of the Babylonian science and
Oh, it's from
most
Babylonian.
yeah.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
no, they certainly weren't inventing earth, air, fire, and water. One of the differences, though, is that these early Milesians, sometimes when they're talking about air, they use a word which means mist. And so even though mist has similarities to air, because it's a vapor like air, it's more in line with what they were thinking of as one of the foundational elements.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, that's the he start to build his model, right? The Earth. I think he talked about Earth and surrounded by water. It's really long. Then air and the fire is on the very outside. Okay. I think that's how he construct the 4 element. Right? And I tend to believe because Malaysian or Greek, they are marine country. So they are not like living in the continental. So they tend to think about like water is important.
Yeah, I agree. They also mention here the gigantic hoops. We're going to run into that later, but that's a very important part.
Yeah, I think that's a great invention, as a to construct the model. Yeah. Okay, Jim, let me put down. Okay, let me put on hold for a while. Okay, I have something coming. Okay, sorry.
Okay.
I stopped the recording, I believe.
Oh, okay, good. A lot of things.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, no problem. Do that anytime you want.
Yeah. I don't want to
Yeah, go ahead and stop anytime you want.
Yeah, I'm going to start. Okay, let's go ahead.
Okay. So a lot of interesting ideas in this paragraph. One idea that's introduced is the notion of multiple worlds. Now
Does he
it's
talk about
important.
multiple world here? Or
What?
does he talk about multiple worlds? You talk about multiverse?
I'm looking for it right now and I don't see it. Yeah. At the very top.
Yeah, you talk about all the worlds, right? Encompass
all the worlds. Yeah. Implying an infinite or indefinitely large number of individual worlds like this one.
I'm not sure, So did you see that in the secondary source?
Oh yeah, it's a big issue.
Okay, that's important.
And it's very interesting because we're going to be reading other philosophers, and it's important to understand that Anaximander wrote his treatise on nature, which was read by all the other philosophers. And philosophers split right down the middle between those who accepted Anaximander's view of multiple worlds and those who believed there was one world.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting because I'm not sure how the Babylonian think about that, but I know, if he has an Indian influence or the Indian do think about it, many zillion of different kind of words. Okay, so I'm not sure they have the connection or not, but I think that I like your distinction because some people, some philosopher may think about, yes, that's the world. We are living in the world. Some people may see we just one of many. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that kind of, well, to me, it sounds like, to me, it sounds like a kind of a whimsical fantasy to talk about multiple worlds. I mean, we don't see other worlds.
I find out one interesting is during around this time, the Chinese philosopher, one of the philosophers think about multi-universe. And do you know how many he think about? He think about 9. There's 9 different worlds like China. Okay.
So there are 9 worlds, right?
Yeah, 9 worlds. I think that's an interesting thinking,
Yeah. So when did they have that idea?
I think they think about if you draw a tic-tac-toe, okay? If you draw a tic-tac-toe, okay, and that's 9, right? I think that's the concept. We are in the center. We have the 8 surround us.
Well, where could they get an idea like that? I mean, why would they even think that there were other worlds? Why did anyone, including Anaximander? I can't imagine where that thought process came from.
I don't know the thought process, but I don't want to go too far. But that's the Chinese thinking, and from the different source, and then they have their own logic. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's a different beginning than the step 1. It's totally different. So it's nothing about infinity. It's not thinking about we are the only one. Kind of think about I'm in the center, but logically should have something surround us. Okay, something like this.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Should we continue?
Yeah, please. Yeah. So that would be on this short paragraph. Okay, the Earth is shaped.
The Earth is shaped like a drum. The diameter being 3 times as great as the depth. We live on one of the flat surfaces. Though supported by nothing, the Earth remains at the center because of its equal distance from everything. The surface of the Earth which was at first entirely submerged, is now partly dry, and it keeps getting drier through continued evaporation. The sea is what is left of the original moisture. The fire has dried up most of it and turned the rest salt by scorching it.
Yeah, he's talking about Genesis. So,
how's that?
well, how does this world is formed, right? The beginning of the creation.
Okay, I'm going to tell you how I interpret the paragraph, and then you tell me how that connects with what you said.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first astounding idea that he proposes is that the Earth is floating in space. This was one of his most important and original ideas. It was totally different than Thales and Anaximander, everyone who had ever imagined what the relation of Earth to the universe was. So why is it floating in space? Because it's an equal distance from everything.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first big idea. The second big idea is the notion that all of the land masses exist, that we are in a stage of the Earth's development where water used to cover the Earth completely, but it has dried out a lot of the water so that all that's left is what we have now. We have some ocean, we have a lot of land, we have a lot of salt. So those are the two major ideas in this paragraph. Now, I'm not sure how that relates to Genesis. Genesis doesn't have any idea like that at all.
Well, Genesis, I told you about the process, right? Okay,
Process,
I think later on,
He's talking
the
about
process,
the beginning.
at the beginning, and then they have the water, then they have the land, the sky. Okay, I think it's in the Genesis start from light, and they have the sky. Okay, and they start have a plant, and that means they have land. Okay, and then they have the sea animal, they have land animal. This kind of
because
process.
God made land rather than a natural process of evaporation. In this interpretation, the only reason there's land is because there's been evaporation that has occurred.
Because I think this part, talking about to equal distance to everything. I think actually it's very Newtonian idea, right? Because if you look at today's model, it's Anaximander is correct. Okay, the Earth is floating. Okay, why is it floating? Because it's not necessarily equal distance to everything, but because the balance, right, of the gravity. Okay, so in this way, he's right according to Newtonian mathematics. Second thing, he also reject. I think they look at around the world, East Asian, Babylonian, Indian, they all think about the same thing, right? They have the something support the earth, and the typical idea is on the top of elephant, and then where is the elephant stand? Or on the big tortoise, and where is the tortoise stand? It's another bigger tortoise. Then they developed the 9 layer of tortoise. Okay, and then how about the biggest tortoise? Then you just have to keep developing the new idea. So I think his idea even sounds during that time sounds not common sensible, but it explained, okay, what's going on, and you don't need to go infinity to say have infinite number of turtle to support.
Yeah, this is a major advance over any idea that had been proposed earlier.
And one thing is not in McGill. He talked about the Earth is shaped like a drum. Okay, and I think in some text I read, it talking about the diameter of the Earth is, since it's a drum, right? So it's a cylinder. So the height of cylinder is 1/3 of the diameter. I don't know. Did you read this part or not?
Sure. But that's McGill doesn't contradict that in any way.
No. But I'm just talking about he talking about it's 1/3 of diameter. So
Yeah.
But I don't know where is 1/3 coming from. Yeah.
I don't know where 1/3 comes from either. But notice that all of his numbers are consistent with each other, because after he gets to the dimensions of the drum, he then goes to the distance to the stars, which is going to be 9 times the diameter. And then the distance to the moon at that point is going to be 18. Then the distance is 27. So these are all, multiples of 9 and 3. So there's a consistency that way. I'm not sure where he came up with the numbers, but
I don't know either. So,
okay. But anyway, he does have his dimensions all worked out.
Well, I think that during the time they have some, because I don't know, they probably have a good way of observation, kind of idea of the distance. Even it's totally wrong in today's sense, but they probably have some idea.
I don't know about that.
You're not sure? You don't? You didn't just?
No, I'm not sure that they. I can't imagine where they, to me, I don't know. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe they had a reason for it that he didn't
if they inherit some technology from Babylonian or Egypt.
Yeah, Babylonia, yeah.
Or Egypt. Okay, probably they have some influence on Egypt. I don't know. But this country have a great land, and they do have some technique or interest to measure the size. So they have this kind of guess. You can say guess, or you can say measuring. Okay, the big length. Okay, big distance, long distance concept. I think.
Yeah, well, the question of how the ancients measured distances is fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
There was a gradual process of measuring the size of the earth and the distance to the moon, and the Greeks did all this.
Yeah, I think all cultures try to come with some idea to measure this kind of distance.
Yeah, but it's very difficult.
Wrong, but, yeah,
very difficult to figure out just by looking, because the problem with he argued that the stars came first, and then the moon, and then the sun, and so he was way off on that, and he didn't it's very hard to tell distances when simply looking at something in the sky, because you don't know how big it is originally, and you don't know how far it is.
Yeah, so I don't know how
very
bright
large can be very far.
Yeah, that's true though.
Yeah, but one of the new parts of this system is the idea that, and this is considered to be an important advance, is that the distance of the stars and the moon and the sun are, because he could believe that the earth was floating in space, he was able to have the view that space was not simply a vault in the sky, but that there were a number of objects that were located from the earth in a way that was different than the earlier view that the heavens were simply a vault. Now, are you following me here?
Yeah, I follow it.
You know about the vault. The vault
is not just a vault.
There's one dome.
A sphere, right? Because
one sphere, not sphere, but hemisphere.
Yeah, but
this was a totally different view, because the objects in space are located at different distances. That hadn't been done before. Because
so here comes the question, right? Does he think about the other side of the dome? Because the Earth
absolutely. Because
he talk
that's
about
yes, that's
Okay.
one of his big advances. That apparently what the speculation is that, and it seems to be agreed by most people, that by looking at the North Star, he was able to observe that the stars rotated around it. Because that's something we can observe when we look at the North Star. Stars rotate around it. Then he extrapolated from that the stars were in a rotational motion. So when he looked at other parts of the sky and he saw stars rising on one horizon and going across the sky and then falling on the other horizon, that they were rotating around the Earth, around the bottom of the Earth, just like he had observed the stars that rotate around the North Star.
Okay.
You follow that?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
so the stars rotate around the Earth, then they fall on the horizon, and then they proceed through the bottom of the Earth until they rise the next evening in the same horizon where they began the preceding evening.
My question is like, does he or thinking about the other side of the Earth?
Yeah, the bottom of the Earth.
Yeah, the
I
bottom.
don't believe so. From pictures that I've seen, what he believed was that the Earth is shaped like a drum,
Yes.
and people live on the flat part on top. And
What about the other side?
I don't think he has any understanding that there's a bottom part that people can live on too.
Okay, so that's a questionable.
Yeah, but we
Okay.
do know that the stars go through space across the top and the bottom. Okay,
Okay, so let's move
next
on.
paragraph.
Okay, fire.
Fire-filled hoops of mist at distances of 18 and 27 Earth radii surround the Earth and revolve around it. Each of these hoops has on its inner side one hole, like the nozzle of a bellows, or in a more modern figure, like the valve hole of an inner tube, through which the fire shines. The hoop 18 Earth radii out is the moon. The outermost is the sun. The diameter of the sun, that is, of the opening in the sun hoop, is as great as that of the Earth. Eclipses and the moon's phases are explained as obstructions over the holes. We are not told what closes them. The stars are the innermost hoops, presumably 9 Earth radii out from us. Anaximander would understandably infer that they were the hoops nearest us, for otherwise the hoops of the sun and moon ought to appear as black bands in the night sky. But these thin, faint star hoops would not interfere with the greater lights of the sun and the moon.
Yeah, I like this model. Okay, even.
So the question is, why did he have to imagine? What were the reasons that he had for imagining that the lights that we see in the sky are simply holes in a hoop? Why did he need hoops? Why didn't he just have
Yeah, because that's the only way to have a balance, right? If you just like most of astronomers think about, they have the big rock or big fireball on top, then the Earth cannot flow, okay, in the center, because the force is not. That's imagine they have the gravity, okay, force on that. So you need a hoop. So so it's the Earth can be in the exactly the center of everything, and it's balanced. I think that's the idea.
Okay, I agree with that. Yeah.
And that's a very interesting idea, you know. And
yeah, but you know, it's interesting to me that people weren't able to imagine these gigantic objects in space. They weren't able to imagine that they would move around the Earth without any support. I think that the people thinking about it just thought, well, they would all fall down, right?
Yeah, they will fall down, right? For
Because they
some,
would all be attracted to the earth,
yeah,
just like everything else falls down. So these hoops kept them in place.
yeah. I think that's a smart idea to think about it.
Yeah, me
But
too.
he probably had to answer what's the material of the hoop. So,
Well, he does explain what the material of the hoop is.
what's the material?
It's made out of air, which he imagines as mist, and the
Oh,
mist
okay. So that's the material is the mist.
surrounds the fire, which is inside it, and then the fire peeks out. So it's all based on these four elements. So the air surrounds the hoop, you know, and he uses the example that a lot of people bring out, which is like bark around a tree.
Oh, yeah, that's here. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a famous metaphor that he uses. Okay, even if Anaximander did not affirm the rotation of the earth, his model of the world contains two very important new ideas. One is that of an earth without material support. All earlier, and indeed many later cosmologists thought themselves obliged to explain the earth's fixity by providing supports. Anaximander, seeing that such shifts only moved the problem back a step or two without solving it, declared boldly that the earth stays at the center because of its equal distance from everything.
Yeah, I think that's a very unique idea, and I've been seeing many cosmological model, okay, around different culture. I think this one is the most creative. Let's put it this way.
Don't you think that, tell me what you think of this. Doesn't it seem to you that the objects in the sky are holes and that light is peeking out? Because they seem to have distinct boundaries. And can't you imagine that the tube that contains the stars are just little pinpricks? Because if they were just objects in space out there, wouldn't they light up the sky more? So if you imagine that what you have are tubes that have little pinpricks, which allow the light from the stars to come out, doesn't that seem to be more in line with what we actually observe?
I think so. I kind of agree, you know.
Yeah.
And then I don't think, okay, I think the idea should not be a tube. Your tube is sort of one-dimensional. You
Yeah.
should be have a like how do you call it? A shell, okay, okay, like a ball, right? A sphere, right? So that will make more sense, you know, right, than the hoop.
Well, it is the way Anaximander imagines it, it is a tube.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
So you like the sphere better, right?
It should be sphere because tube, it look perfect in two-dimensional, but actually in three-dimensional, it will be difficult to construct. And then well, yeah, you can do it in tube, you know, just more complicated, I think, you know.
Well, I think one of the things that makes it more complicated is just imagine the number of tubes that would be necessary to explain all the stars. Because the moon and the sun, all you need is one tube for them. But for the stars, there are thousands of them. You just would
Well, I
need.
think he's talking about the star has all stars share one tube, or each
How can
star has
they?
it. Huh?
How can they share one tube?
I don't know. I'm not very sure.
Well,
I'm
I think the way I understand it, there's a number of tubes at
so
that.
they have like I don't know. They at least they can observe 500 different stars. So they have a 500 tube for each star. That's what you believe?
500 yeah.
Okay.
Different
I'm not
locations.
sure because I didn't I don't know. You read it from other secondary sources.
Well, it doesn't, you can't imagine it as one tube because stars are all over the sky.
But again, during that time, they believe the star is not moving. Or they are moving.
They are
Well,
moving.
no. They are the star are moving according to the Earth. All culture.
Everyone, you could see the stars moving every
But
night.
but remember, every culture notice they have the sun, they have the moon, they have the 5 planets and the star, right? I think every single culture.
Well,
They separate planet from star.
in this system of Anaximander, the planets aren't really dealt with very clearly. But very soon after, they were going to look, the evolution of the theory is like this. First came Anaximander, who imagined everything in tubes. Just a few years later, Pythagoras is the one that describes spheres that are rotating. So first comes Anaximander's tubes, that was modified by the spheres. And by the time that Pythagoras and these others were defining these rotating objects as spheres, they had different spheres for one sphere for all the stars. Once again, you wouldn't have to have multiple tubes if you had a whole sphere because you could have pinpricks everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. So
okay, but
yeah.
then you had to have separate spheres for everything that was moving at a different rate. And since the planets moved at a different rate than the stars, you had to have separate spheres for them. So what you eventually wind up with is one sphere for the moon, one for the sun, one for the stars, and then several for the different planets. And that's how you eventually wind up with the 9 spheres. That view was inherited, for another 1,000 years.
Okay, that's great. I didn't notice the what's that? The Pythagoras is not many years after.
No, in fact, some people believe that Pythagoras was one of the students in the Milesian school.
Oh, okay.
Now then,
So
of
he
course,
is
he went
from
to
that
Italy.
side original. So
He's so different, he's so different than the others that, he starts his own Pythagorean school. But he's so, in terms of time and original geography, he's so close to the others that some scholars argue that he's one of the students.
Okay. Just 1 minute. I have to put on hold for a moment. Just 1 minute. Yeah. But sorry, I have many things come out today.
No, don't ever worry about that. Put it on pause as much as you want.
Yeah, I already put on pause. Yeah.
It actually gives me a break anyway.
Okay.
So I like it.
Okay. Just take a 2 minutes break. Okay, so let me
Go ahead.
take care of this business. So
yeah. So we have
Okay, I'm back.
Okay, great.
Okay, let's start.
Okay, so anyway, just to get this straight, so the most primitive view of astronomy seems to be a vault. And then Anaximander, in some ways, appears to be an advance by describing it in terms of tubes. And then beyond that, when we have to include planets as well, we realize that they are traveling at different rates of speed and different direction, and we can't just include them as, in the same tubes as the others. So now we have to increase the number of tubes, but by that time we have Pythagoras, who looks at the sphere as a perfect geometric form. And so that's where the introduction of the 9 separate concentric spheres comes in, which remains the orthodox view of astronomy through Dante,
Yeah, I did in the
thousands of years.
Yeah, in the Plato's diameters, okay, it's
Yeah.
also the nice field. Yeah, that's from Pythagoras. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Okay, so if
The
we
other
move
new
on,
idea is that of explanation in terms of a theory involving postulated entities. For we certainly do not see the hoops, we see only the breathing holes. Why did Anaximander postulate the hoops instead of resting content with a simpler common sense conception of fiery spheres or disks? Our ancient sources give no hint. However, only one answer seems possible. Anaximander must have reasoned this way. Heavy bodies near the Earth tend to move toward the center of concentration of mass, that is, toward the center of the Earth. Now, the Earth, being a very heavy body, should likewise move toward the greatest concentration of mass, if there is one. And there appear to be at least 2, the sun and the moon. Therefore, if the sun and the moon are what they appear to be, the Earth ought to move toward them, or they toward us. Since this did not happen, the Earth must really be equidistant from these bodies, despite appearances. This condition could only come if the bodies surround the Earth symmetrically, that is, our hoops, of which only the breathing holes are visible. The idea of mist wrapping up fire, which seems strange to us, was natural enough to Anaximander, since lightning emerged from the clouds easily suggests such a notion. We know that, in fact, Anaximander explained lightning in some such way. When the wind is shut up in a cloud and bursts forth violently, the tearing of the cloud makes the noise of thunder, and the rift gives the appearance of a flash.
I don't have much to talk about this because I don't know.
But
You
we've
have
already talked about some
Yeah,
of
I think we already talked about most of this.
We
Yeah.
talked about the fact that Anaximander's solution to the problem is that if we have objects in the sky, why aren't they falling to Earth?
Yes.
And the hoops gives an answer for that. Now, one of the new ideas in this has to do with his explanation of thunder and lightning. And we know about Anaximander's views on the explanations of thunder and lightning because Aristotle writes a treatise on meteorology, and in his usual fashion includes all of the views of previous philosophers. So a lot of times, a lot of the material that we have about Anaximander comes from Aristotle. But his views about where lightning and thunder come from are just part of his his viewpoint that the world can all be explained in physical, mechanical terms. We don't need God. We don't need a God like Zeus throwing down thunderbolts. We can explain everything just in terms of literal physical processes. And his explanation of thunder is that when the clouds bang into each other, then they create that noise.
Yeah, I think they share the same concept of Greek mythology during this time. They believe Zeus
They already
is
knew that,
thundering.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, Hesiod had already written a century earlier.
Okay, that's great.
And
Okay.
Homer.
So instead of using
So these
Zeus,
people seem to be completely negating
yeah,
this
look like
entire
they are
mythology, which was a common view.
they are kind of like ignore, okay, what's the mythology, okay, tell us, right? So kind of ignore, bypass. They didn't spell out, but seems like they already say, forget about this. Okay, I'm not going to deal with this god and goddess.
Well said.
Yeah.
They don't ever explicitly state, we're not going to pay any attention to the gods. They just ignore them in their explanation of the world.
Yeah. So in my
But we
point of
have to
view,
look at it, I think, as a radical move on their part.
yes, actually, it's quite radical. That's why I think they are more radical than atheist. Okay, so
And where do they get this radicalism? I think partly it has to do with living in Miletus. Miletus was a very sophisticated, wealthy city that, of course, is in well, it's a port city which is right off the coast of present-day Turkey, and so connected to the more sophisticated intellectual centers in Mesopotamia, such as Babylon. And I think that they were in constant contact, that they were a very cosmopolitan group that was in constant contact with all of these various views from other cultures. And I think that put them in a position to be ahead of the curve, even than people who were back on mainland Greece. Because back in mainland Greece, this is 600 BC, we don't hear about really any intellectual activity going on. The intellectual activity of all the great poets and philosophers and playwrights came a century later. At this time, all the intellectual action was occurring
in Malaysia.
in Anatolia, in Miletus.
Okay.
So then very soon after these Milesians were writing, the Persians conquered the entire area. And so there was an intellectual migration, not back to Greece, but into Italy and Syracuse. And so very shortly after,
Analyze Italy first, then
we went to Italy, exactly.
okay.
And all of these great philosophers in the Western tradition that were living in Italy were people who had fled Turkey, Miletus, that area of Asia.
For what reason they bypass?
They left. Oh, why did they bypass?
Yeah,
Because,
you must pass by. You must pass
I
by.
think Greece was still primitive compared to some of the colonies.
Okay, so when they pass by, they say, "Oh, that's just barbarian. So let's go to other place." Yeah.
I think so. They wanted to go to the areas that were more sophisticated
which
so
is Sicily, I believe.
Miletus was far more sophisticated than Greece at that time. Greece,
Yeah, I agree. But how about in Italy, the
and
South?
I think I think Italy must have been more sophisticated than Greece also.
Okay.
So they all went to Italy, and then another explanation might be just that they were more familiar as colonists going to another colony. Maybe there was more freedom, possibly.
You mean Greek, but Italy is more freedom.
Yeah, they would prefer, Italy, which would be another colony, which would be free of mainland Greece. And so maybe they would prefer that.
Oh,
But maybe it's also it's just a more sophisticated place. But
okay.
you have all of these philosophers in Greece, all migrating at this time. And even Anaximander, while he was still living in Miletus, the later part of his life, Persia had come in and taken over the area. So he was living under Persian rule.
Yeah, I know he lived under Persian rule. Yeah.
Oh, you didn't know that?
Yeah, I know that. And then I know they escaped from Persian rule. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on.
Okay. If this conjectural restoration of Anaximander's reasoning is correct, then Anaximander grasped the essential nature of the theoretical explanation of a law or natural regulatory holding universally, in this case gravitation, and accounting for or generalized from observation falling bodies on the Earth's surface, leading to the hypothesis of unobserved entities, the hoops, in order to render other observed phenomena, the sun and moon not falling, consistent with the law. This is 9/10 of scientific method as now understood. Had he devised or admitted the necessity of some test of the hoop hypothesis, he would have had the other 10. And even if he did not reason in this way, it seems that the hoops must have played this role of hypothetical entities in respect to some general theory, for there was no traditional or mythological incentive for supposing them. In consequence, the scientific nature of Anaximander's thought is established.
Number 10. So basically, he is talking about the universal law. He tried to observe the universal law, and the law will match to explain the observation. And then he started to build the try to build a universal law based on the observation, okay, because the star, moon, sun never fall, okay, and then he built his own hypothesis, which is the hoop, okay, to explain, okay, what's going on, and it's very modern way of doing science, in my point of view,
I agree with that.
Yeah, and that's what Miguel summarized on this paragraph.
Yeah. And he summarizes here one of the interests that we have in reading Anaximander, because we see the origins of the scientific approach.
Yeah, I think that's in this.
You know who was a great fan of Anaximander is one of your favorite philosophers, Karl Popper.
Really?
Oh yeah, he was so enthusiastic about Anaximander.
I can imagine. I can imagine the I didn't read this part, but I can imagine. Okay, Karl Popper would like this person, and also like him. Even a lot of we can criticize. He made a lot of mistakes.
But we look at what sort of advances these philosophers were making in science. And we're talking in this paragraph about universal law. That's one of the assumptions that scientists make, that law that we observe, that we can observe phenomena which follow universal law. So we observe that rocks fall to earth, everything falls to earth. So we assume that objects in space will have the same law. You know, this is Newton's great advance, going from apples falling from a tree to the moon traveling around the earth. And then we assume the universal law of gravity. But another part of the scientific method is simply observation and speculation. Let me tell you another example of scientific reasoning that was done at this time by a fellow Milesian, Anaximander. Remember that Anaximander followed Anaximander. And Anaximander argued that the arche, the first element, was air. What he wanted to argue was that air, if it becomes rarefied, becomes fire. And if it thickens, then it becomes a solid. And his argument was that when you blow into your hands, it feels cold. So he argued from that since blowing air, what is actually occurring is that air is thickening, that therefore air, due to thickening and thinning, could become all the different elements. And this is considered an advance because he uses quantitative measurement for the first time to explain natural phenomena. Now, what is the quantitation going on? The fact that air was becoming thicker and thinner. So he uses a combination of quantitative reasoning and also experience that can be reproduced by experiment to prove that air is the original element. What do you think about that for scientific?
Let me ask you this. How does the water come in from? But no,
we know that air,
fire. I'm sorry, fire.
Well, we know that air doesn't contradict water because air can be
Yeah, that's not the problem. Okay, I talk about fire. Where is the fire coming from? According to Anaximander.
Fire comes from a natural rarefication of air. He doesn't explain where the rarefication comes from. All he has to show is that as air becomes thicker and thinner, then it turns into these other substances.
So
I think
air
it's
becomes
pretty obvious. I think it's common sense that as air becomes rarefied, it becomes like fire.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I accept it. Okay.
All right, let's go into the next paragraph. The power and originality of Anaximander's thought is displayed preeminently in his biology. Myth making, even when it assumed a development of the cosmos as a whole, always conceived of animals, including man, as having appeared on the scene from nowhere in their latter-day forms, either as special creations of the gods or in some unexplained manner. In sharp contrast to this sort of facile storytelling, Anaximander worked out a theory of animal evolution based on the ideas of adaptation to environment and survival of the fittest.
Yeah, I think that's a pre-Socratic Darwinian, this kind of thinking, so. So we're done with the cosmology model, and right now we go to the biology, right? Okay.
So you might ask, how are all these ideas connected? How does his biology connect to his cosmology?
That's exactly I'm interested. Okay, what do you think?
Well, first of all, my impression of what Anaximander was doing was describe a complete system which involved everything in the universe.
Yes, I agree.
And another feat of Anaximander, for which he's often praised, is the fact that he's the first person in history to draw a map of the entire world, which was a very important advance. So he was already familiar with maps because the Babylonians and Egyptians were already making maps century preceding. But what he did was make a map of the entire world. And what it is supposed is that all of these different contributions he was making in drawing a world map, in talking about biology, and talking about the origin of planets and stars, that they were all part of one universal vision of how everything is connected. So that's the first thing. That means that these weren't necessarily separate topics. They were all part of one large project, a description of the world. Now, the second thing is that when you read his description of biology in detail, you see a lot of the same methodologies and concepts, such as fire and the elements and how they burn each other, cause evaporation, and various other parts of his system of astronomy applied to biology.
So how does it apply to biology? Okay, so this kind of
the complete description of his biology is complicated and technical. But so I don't know if McGill's going to go into that, and I don't know if I can recreate it. It has to do with creating a shell very similar to the tube that's created in space, and living in a shell half protected, and evaporation of water, and fire takes a place.
Okay.
All the details.
So you read this part, okay,
Yeah.
from the secondary source. I didn't. That's why I'm asking you.
That's all I can tell you.
Okay, so probably we
I
can.
have more to say about evolution, but they come up in later paragraphs.
Yeah, let's talk about the evolution, because that's also interesting. Okay, so go ahead.
Well, let me just say that scholars and interpreters of Anaximander differ greatly on how much merit to give Anaximander for his theories of evolution. One of my favorite sources claims that it's just a pile of nonsense and he shouldn't be given any credit for it. And they go into great detail about his real scientific contributions, but only give a tiny little paragraph to his views on evolution. So that's one view. McGill is a lot more charitable, and so are various other authors. Now, when you read the mechanics of his explanation, they seem a bit absurd. They're certainly, a million miles away from Darwin. But it's my view that just looking at imagining the concept that people originally were fish who changed over time and became people. To me, that is just, such an amazing leap that I don't know, why anyone wouldn't give him a lot of credit just on that basis, even if the mechanics of how it happened are a little bit strange.
Yeah, I agree with that. I read this part, and I think that's quite advanced.
It's quite an advance.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I agree
Now,
with you.
apparently, what happened after Anaximander, along came Aristotle and said that people do not change over time, that there is no evolution. Borrowing from Plato's notion of forms, which are eternal and unchanging,
Yeah.
He didn't like the view that things are constantly changing. He described a universe that is eternal and unchanging and consists of unchanging forms. And that was the view that was held for another several thousand years.
I just have to, even I disagree with Plato, but I just have to have some apology for Plato, Aristotle, or this kind of moral philosopher, right? Because one big challenge they have to face is a featherless biped, right? We have no different than any animal. So we need to find a way to distinguish man and animal. So in this case, they have to work hard to make sure humans are special. And then we even look like an animal. We don't have to behave like an animal. I think that's their maintain. I think that's put it way. So
Well, I don't know why you would need to introduce morality or ethics into it, because people obviously use rationality, which other animals don't. And isn't Aristotle the one who defined the human as being a rational animal? You don't need ethics, you don't need moral behavior, you just need
you need to
rationality.
explain why we need to rationale. Okay, why we need a
Well, it's
rationality.
not a question of why we need it, it's just a fact that humans are more rational, and that would be a common sense way of defining how humans are different than
That's
animals.
Aristotle's view,
Yes.
not necessary every philosopher think this way. Okay, let's put this way. Okay, I
Yeah,
think
once you get to the Christian,
let's forget about reason, this kind of thing. But they do, I think if you see, we still can categorize Anaximander as nature philosopher. Not even he talk about justice, but he's not start from human. He's not start, he start from the nature. So for the later philosopher like Socrates, he changed from as a human center. So this kind of philosopher, their concern is among humans, not human and the nature. That's why they put human in the center, and they have to reject human is evolved from other animal. I think they have to make a clear distinguish between man and the beast. I think that's their starting point. I think
sure.
Yeah, that's just my
Certainly,
thought.
that's a very important part of the Christian tradition.
Oh yeah, that's why Christian find Aristotle and Plato in line with their theory. Because
But I'm not sure that Aristotle makes that strong a distinction between humans and other animals.
you don't.
No.
Okay, we
Looks
will
at,
deal with Aristotle later. Okay.
Well, anyway, but yeah, okay, yeah. What you're saying is an important topic.
Yeah, that's
How
another
are
topic.
humans
We will deal.
distinguished from the lower animals? Yeah. One way of distinguishing them, I think Kant would say, has to do with our own moral sense and sense of right and wrong.
Rational being.
All right. Yeah, right. The way they define Kant talked about rationality, it's just all in terms of making moral choices.
Mhm.
All right. The power and originality of Anaximander's thought is
I think we read this one.
okay. His starting point was the observation that while other animals quickly find food by themselves, man alone requires a lengthy period of suckling. Hence, had he been originally as he is now, he would never have survived. That is to say, a theory of the world which in general is evolutionary is incompatible with the human species, having appeared all at once as babies. For if it had, it could never survive in the state of nature. It follows that animals whose young are long immature must be the products of gradual development, presumably including socialization, from some other kind of life not so ill-fitted for the world. Furthermore, the theory that in the beginning there had been no dry land suggested, if it did not require, that all life originated in the sea. Hence, living creatures arose from the moist element as it was evaporated by the sun. The transition from marine to terrestrial life occurred thus. The first animals were produced in the moisture, each enclosed in a prickly bark. As they advanced in age, they came out upon the drier part. When the bark broke off, they survived for a short time. As for human beings in particular, they too were like other animals, namely fish, in the beginning. At first, human beings arose in the inside of fishes, and after having been reared like sharks, become capable of protecting themselves, they were finally cast ashore and took to land. The mention of sharks was not fanciful, but based on the acute observation, to be sure, quite possibly made by somebody else, that certain sharks of the Eastern Mediterranean hatch their eggs inside their bodies so that they can seem akin to mammals.
Yeah, I think that's that I call his creation story, Genesis story. Okay, how does all the animal, human come into be? Okay, so
Well, the difference between this and the Genesis story,
oh, of course, they're different.
they're radically different.
Yeah.
One gives a scientific view of the evolution of people from fish, and the other one gives a supernatural view, which is that they begin as human beings. There's no transition, there are no natural processes. It's, difference between a supernatural account and a natural process. If we wanted to describe how did everything occur naturally, we might have a view like this. But where you're correct is where you talk about the similarity between the account given in Genesis and this account, because they're both talking about the origin of the human form.
Yeah.
One talks about it in naturalistic terms, another in supernatural terms.
Yeah, but the Genesis, just take the creation story, the 7 days, is not that supernatural. Let's put this way. They talk about the existence of plants, then talk about fish, birds, the sea animal, and the flying animal, then talk about land animal, then talk about people come out, okay, in 6 days, okay. So of course it's very different from Anaximander's model, because in the Genesis there's no transition, right, from fish to beast to human. They just boom, 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 they just appear, okay, in this way. But both of them are similar, okay. They are talking about, they try to explain or try to talk about how does this world has human, has beast, has flying birds, have sea animal, have plants, okay. They all try to explain this one, but of course they are in a totally different way of explain, so.
Okay, I see your point.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things about this paragraph that interest me. The first is a notion that he's trying to make a jump between fish and people. And he points out that sharks have the ability to give birth to live young. So what I found interesting about that is that it's an example of using evidence to show evolutionary progress. And what it reminds me are anthropologists that discovered the missing link between human beings and apes as being, you know, various forms of primitive human, Homo habilis and Australopithecine and other missing links. So to me, this is the first example of a missing link, because otherwise, how could you ever accept that humans could come from fish? Fish lay eggs, they're so different. But he points out, look, these fish give birth to live young, just like people do. So to me, it seems as if, you know, the shark is kind of a link between the two.
But why didn't they use ape, right? They should know monkey and the ape. They are more.
Well, they're talking about fish, not apes.
Well, but between if be more sophisticated, he should talk about from the shark, and then the fish animal then become land animal, then land animal become people. You know, I think that would be more reasonable. You know, because you should not. I don't know. They should know monkey, right? They should understand there's some animal called monkey, right? In Greek, you know. So I'm not sure. Does Plato?
But do you think that Anaximander believed that people did evolve from monkeys?
I think if you base on observation, right? It's
No,
very
setting that
reasonable.
aside, do you think Anaximander believed that to be true?
I don't know.
Well, doesn't it seem as if he would, because there are no jumps. He's just arguing that there is kind of a slow adaptation and change that occurred. If he can argue that fish became human, you know, then basically he doesn't have to make the argument about apes, because he's already made the argument for something far more difficult. So if you assume that humans originally were fish, but they gradually became human.
So directly from shark, gradually become human without being a monkey, just direct. I think it would be more reasonable to have a shark become the mammals, and from mammal to bipedal, like monkey, then human. That would be more reasonable. Okay.
Well, can't we just assume that? If we start with sharks and then go to human, can't we just assume that all those other intermediate steps are there?
Oh yeah, that's my question. You know, so you are okay. So I think we agree on this. We just don't see in the text, but he probably reasonably think about that.
Maybe, yeah. Well, that's our speculation anyway.
Yeah, that's
The
right.
other thing that's really interesting about this paragraph is his observation that people can't survive as infants alone, which is a fascinating aspect of the human being, because the infant, unlike other animals, even monkeys, is totally helpless. And he observes that, and he says that this could not have been the original human situation, because they never would have survived. And so what it suggests in this McGill, and what I think is true, is that he believed that there was this gradual evolution so that humans now are in the situation that exists today, which is.
So his point is gradually improve.
Yeah.
Okay. So to today's, it's not like day one we can do that, because gradually we lengthen the suckling period. Okay.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
Okay, that's great. Yeah.
And
I didn't think about today's. the suckling period probably up to like 40 years old. So
Yeah, that's true.
that's another proof of evolution. So,
Long suckling period.
yeah.
Okay, Anaximander wrote a book, the Western world's first scientific treatise, of which one sentence or part of a sentence has been preserved. Things return to their origins as is ordained, for they give satisfaction and reparation to one another for their injustice, according to the ordering of time. It is clear from this that Anaximander's philosophy made use of the concept of justice, pervasive of Greek thought, according to which there is an impersonal and inexorable force in nature charged with keeping things balanced. In society and in the world at large, every person, state, and element has its allotted portion, and injustice, the encroachment of anything beyond its bounds, is followed automatically and surely by restorative retribution. The notice lies at the root both of Greek moral ideas and the conception of laws of nature. In the fragment of Anaximander, we find it evidently being developed in the direction of the latter. It would be risky to infer anything more as to Anaximander's worldview from this half sentence. In particular, it by no means shows that Anaximander viewed the universe as inherently moral in any sense that we would naturally give to that expression.
So here is he start to talk about the I think here he start to extend his I think that's I'm thinking. He has the concept of like this world should be balanced. Okay. So everything in balance should go back to that's a have an inexorable force to go back, right? Just like bamboo, you bend it, it definitely will go back. And that's why he applied this one to justice. And that's his justice is kind of restorative retribution, right? So you need to pay back, okay, what you owe, okay. I think that's his concept of justice, okay, which is not the only concept of justice because they have many different kind of justice. Like
why not? It seems to me that it is justice.
Well, it's justice, but it's not
It
only
seems to me
concept
that
of
it covers
justice.
everything.
Well, there's a different kind of concept, right? Like John Rowe talk about distributive justice, right? Or you talk about the egalitarian justice. But this justice is talking about retribution, right? You have to pay back. Okay, so that's one kind of justice. But that's I think that's the reason. Reasonable explanation. He developed this kind of concept of justice because he believed this world should be balanced, which is the inexorable force. Okay, you cannot resist to come back. So that's the justice. And I think McGill make a good point about we should not base on this to believe he believed Anaximander believed they have the natural force of justice, the divine or this world is naturally moral. Okay, I think he kind of think about that's the irresistible force should come back to this. I think that's what he think. So his justice could be not necessarily a moral law, more on the natural law side. Okay, that's I'm thinking. I'm not very sure, but that's in my mind.
Well, maybe McGill is warning people against saying that we live in a moral universe.
Yes.
However, I do think that the notion of restoration back to a balance is common, first of all, in the natural world, but also in our view of what is appropriate for justice in the moral world as well. Because when things are out of balance, we want to restore them to.
I think that's the nature thinking for all kind of people, right? They all have this kind of thinking. That's why like eye for eye, and
I was thinking an eye for an eye. What
yeah,
about,
that's
seems,
very nature primary thinking about eye for eye, teeth for teeth, eye for
that's a
eye.
kind of justice, yeah.
Yeah.
But in the natural world, well, first of all, let me ask you, since you used the example of bamboo, I was wondering, is this an idea that you've run into in Asian philosophy at all? Is there any talk about restoration or going back to, the original?
I would say the concept of justice is very different in ancient Chinese thinking. I even cannot find a word match with the word justice. Okay, that's very difficult situation. Okay, so I would say I think if since you asked this question, I would say the high school in the Western culture is talking about justice, right? In this society. And then in the Eastern, I think Eastern Asia is talking about harmony. Okay. So harmonic is the highest way. And you can claim, okay, a just society is a harmonious society. And we also can claim a harmonious society is just. Okay. But the situation is what's the goal, okay, of their social norm. Okay. I would say in the West, we talk about justice. In the East, people talk about harmony. Okay, that does I have to say.
That's
but of course, what's the definition of harmony? What's the definition of justice? That's you can go pages or pages of text to talk about.
Very interesting. Do you think that in the natural world that there is actually a law of justice? Do things revert to the way they originally were once they're knocked out of place?
No.
So do you think that, why do you think Anaximander believes that?
I believe Anaximander's, well, since we don't have a lot of text to know what
No,
Anaximander.
I'm just asking for speculation.
Yeah, my speculation is his justice is not moral law. It's
I'm not talking about moral law. I'm talking about natural law.
Yeah,
in the natural universe, is there justice? In Anaximander's sense, if something,
yes, it's the nature world is justice. Okay,
well,
because the justice is based on balance. Okay, so in this way, he might think about if I kill let's say if I kill a dog for fun, okay, that is injustice, okay, or it's unjust act. Some way there, okay, I will pay back, which is a natural law. That's my speculation, okay, in this sense.
Well, I thought that what he was talking about was more like if you bend bamboo, it will spring back.
No, that's the same as what I'm talking about, right?
That's what I'm asking for.
I kill a dog for fun. Okay.
Well, that's a moral problem as opposed to a natural problem.
So you are talking about.
I'm asking, can you give me some other examples of justice occurring in the natural universe outside of living things?
Well, for example, like Oh, you mean outside the living thing?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Because isn't that what this paragraph is talking about?
Well, right now you ask a big question. I'm not sure.
Well, I was thinking of one example, which
Okay.
is that if you lift something in the air, then it will have a tendency to fall back to its original location.
Yes. Okay.
So the example of potential energy, where if you move something out of its natural state, natural position, it will go back. Another
So you call
example,
this a nature? Do you call this justice?
that's what I think Anaximander is talking about for
I
justice.
think he's talking about more than that. I think he's talking about you did something unnatural. That's called unnatural. Okay. And then they have some kind of natural force, not divine, natural force will make you pay back. Okay. So one example is I steal somebody's stuff. Then you will find out, okay, actually what I stole doesn't benefit me at all. Okay. And then I will bring a lot of misfortune after that. Okay. I think that's what he's talking about. Okay. But of course, that's just my speculation based on what my limited reading, you know.
Well, this is a very famous fragment of Anaximander. And the sentence reads, "Thing returned to their origins as is ordained." And it's this fragment which has intrigued so many philosophers over time. And I just want to bring up something that I know
Does
from
this sentence in the text, in the McGill text?
Yes, at the beginning of the paragraph. Okay, so first of all, it says Anaximander wrote a book, and then it says things return to its origin, as is origin, and then it goes on, and this is the one single fragment which we believe came from Anaximander. And Nietzsche had some important thoughts about that. He believed that it was a very pessimistic view of the world, because he believed that it seemed that Anaximander was arguing that when the world only goes so far, then everything will return to a state of decay. And that seemed to be part of his cosmology, that it started with just chaos and would end with chaos.
Well, actually, I totally agree with you, and then I agree with your example. Okay, so but I think, okay, it's extend a little bit more, okay, to not just pure, like you throw a rock to the air, you will fall down. Not just this, there's more than that to our society. I think, but one of the reasons I think is when I read this sentence, I also highlight this sentence. Okay, this sentence is exact as described in. Well, I have to bring the 道德经 the Taoism text. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, it talk about chapter 25, talking about exactly the same thing. Talk about you go far and you go away, it naturally come back. Okay, so it almost the same description. And then in the Tao Te Ching text, it talk about continue, talking about heaven, earth, and the human, and that's the soul. So I have to admit, I probably been influenced by this Chinese text. So I naturally think about it could also extend a little bit to the human behavior. Okay. which is not moral law, but because human is part of nature. So it will have this kind of thing, I think. Just a little bit, but not very far away. That's my thought, you know.
Well, that's fine. But the example that I gave, which was that the world began as chaos and will end in chaos, is apparently one of his thoughts. And it's the part that Nietzsche believed was so pessimistic. Now, that doesn't have a moral component to it. That simply talks about natural processes in the physical world. You could, have a modern, astronomer scientist saying the same thing. So in an example like that, would you argue that there's a moral component to it? Or doesn't he just seem to be talking about natural law that
I would say just talk about natural law, but they have moral implication on that. Okay, that's put this way. Okay.
Well, I agree with that. It's an example. Once again, we were talking about the fact that some ideas overlap. Remember at the very beginning.
I think that's the very subtle, small overlap.
I agree.
Yeah, but I have to admit, okay, my argument is not very clear or very convincing. Let's put it this way. That's just my thought.
Okay.
I don't have a strong conviction. Okay, for example,
Okay.
if we are discuss about Kant, okay, first critique or the secondary, I will say, okay, I'm very clear what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But in this one, I'm not very clear.
Okay. All right.
Just exchange the thought with you.
Okay. Okay, even allowing for the fact that in Greek and other Near Eastern thought before the 6th century BC, there existed a discernible tendency towards rationalization of traditional myths, and that the myths themselves contain the kernels of evolutionary and natural law concepts, it is hardly an exaggeration to say that Anaximander single-handedly invented science
and the
philosophy as we know them. Above all, he put rationalism on such a firm foundation that among the educated, it took mythology 1,000 years to overthrow it. And even then, it did not perish utterly.
Okay, I think here I talk about his rationalization of the traditional myths. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we already talked about this.
Right? But what is he saying when he says it took mythology 1,000 years to overthrow it? What took 1,000 years to overthrow rationalism? Is he talking about Judeo-Christian tradition?
Which part you talk about?
The second half of the paragraph, he says, he put rationalism on such a firm foundation, okay, that's Anaximander, that among the educated, it took mythology 1,000 years to overthrow it. What's he referring to? Is he referring,
Christian?
He's talking about Anaximander, and he starts off by saying that he single-handedly
invented the science, philosophy.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what we read, right? Above he put the
and then it took the educated
firm foundation.
Among the educated, it took mythology 1,000 years to overthrow.
Which is not true because Plato just quickly threw.
I don't know if I understand this paragraph.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's probably we have to take Miguel.
I don't understand the paragraph, but I will say that Anaximander certainly did bring rationalization into the Western tradition at this point.
Well, but I don't think people pay attention on him.
Well, they did though, because he had a huge influence on Aristotle. Aristotle, first of all, he influenced all the other pre-Socratics. We're going to run into all of the ways that they rationalize the world as well. Then we get to Plato, who objects to discussing the natural world in a rational way. And he, with Plato, philosophy undergoes a revolution. We call it a Copernican revolution, similar to what Kant did, because he brought philosophy down to earth. So for a very short time, philosophy moved toward question of the soul and question of goodness and questions that weren't related to stars and so forth and the original elements. But then Aristotle came along. Aristotle absorbed everything from Plato, but he also read these Milesians and discussed all of their ideas. And I think it, if you look at Aristotle,
Okay, yeah.
it just includes an incredible amount of science in his, So I don't think that the scientific view disappeared at a
So you
certain
believe
point.
he has a strong influence to Aristotle?
He had a strong influence on Aristotle, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, we will deal with this one later, I think. Yeah. So
Okay. Any naturalistic worldview at the beginning of the 6th century would be remarkable. It is staggering to find that the very first philosophy contained such transcendently important ideas as an unsupported earth, theoretical explanation involving inferred entities, and animal evolution from marine organisms to man in accordance with the principle of adaptation, and quite possibly the Earth's rotation and gravitation in addition.
yeah, we talk about this.
These are all really big ideas, really
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
It is not surprising that Anaximander's immediate successor, Anaximenes, was incapable of such daring speculation. He accordingly taught a more common sense philosophy in which the earth was held up by mist, the unobservable hoops were abolished, and the sun, moon, and stars were like fiery leaves floating in the air. He was, so to speak, the first positivist. The belief that the earth needed a support continued to be held in Anaximander's homeland for a century, down to and including Anaxagoras, whose philosophy was otherwise essential in elaboration of Anaximander's. But the Pythagoreans adopted Anaximander's astronomy, hoops and all, at first, since, as is well known, Copernicus and Kepler were strongly influenced by Pythagorean theories. It is possible to demonstrate a continuous chain of development in this science from Miletus to Mount Palomar. Unfortunately, Anaximander's equally promising beginnings in biology bore no fruit. Though Empedocles also recognized the principle of adaptation, the details of his evolutionary theory were fantastic, and after his time, the authority of Aristotle in favor of fixity of species put an end to evolutionary speculation in the ancient world. The revival 2,000 years later owed nothing to Anaximander.
Okay, I have a question before we end it. Okay, so what does that mean here? He was, so to speak, the first positivist. Okay.
I think that what the positivists are known for is restricting their philosophy to what can be observed without speculating on metaphysical foundations.
So positives will reject everything unobservable.
They would reject everything except what can be observed.
Okay, so the
since
tube,
Anaximander speculated about hoops and other things like that, they would reject that. They would say, we can't see them, therefore let's not speculate. Let's just stick to the observation.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you.
Yeah, I really like this last paragraph, as you can imagine, because it just, discusses the larger context and how this philosophy compares and contrasts with other schools. I really thought that was good.
And that's explain why McGill doesn't include the Anaximenes.
Yeah, right. Mhm.
because it's kind of the backward movement.
Yeah,
So,
they include, yeah, yeah, that's true.
yeah. But McGill also not include the Pythagoreans. Okay. What, but in other McGill they included, but not this one. So
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a shame that it doesn't include Pythagoras. Yeah. But maybe
okay.
the reason is the same reason that he didn't include the I Ching in the first edition, because there's just so much, technical speculation related to, different kinds of numbers that it just wasn't even, considered to be good philosophy or something.
Yeah. So before we end this one, you have any final thought on this?
No, except that
Okay,
I
so
enjoyed
let me.
talking about it,
Okay, that's great. Let me end for today, and the next week we are going to talk about
Heraclitus.
Heraclitus. That's
Yeah.
another great
Yeah,
one.
yeah, it was very